Hey guys, welcome to a new episode of ArtFeedback. Today we're gonna take a look at an artwork made by Nicolò Rivello. He sent me a few characters he created for a project called Beyond Skyrim Morrowind, and I picked one of these characters and did a paint over. So first, let's take a look at the time-lapse process since you guys asked for it. Alright, now that we took a look at the process time-lapse, we're gonna discuss my thoughts for these paint over. So I want to start by premising that there's already a lot of good stuff happening in this design, because I know Morrowind and I know that these characters that I've seen, they definitely fit the style and mood of the project, so that's definitely a good starting point. And the idea was to create some bandit armor that uses, scrap parts of animals or insects and leather, bones, things like that, to convey the put together feel to it. So that's something that I try to preserve, but it was already implemented into the original design. I also want to say that characters are definitely not my expertise. I mostly do environment and props, as you might already know, but I try to apply what I know about, shape design and color material to this character as well, to see if there's something we can do to improve it. So the first thing that I noticed while taking a look at these is that in terms of values, the original one had a lot of getting together, like values really close to each other. And sure, the bone part and the pants were a little bit brighter, but overall, if we take a look at the black and white, we can see that all the torso and, pants and leather accessories were kind of merging together. So the biggest thing that I tried to do in this design, more than anything else, all the other changes, is that I tried to separate elements a little bit better. So you can see my version that with both color and values, I try to create these areas of separation that they don't merge into each other in terms of values. So for example, I try to darken all of these. Let's make a new layer. I darken all of these. And then again, I also use the occlusion to create some of that separation. For example, under this area, right? You can see a little bit of occlusion there. So that's the main part that I really focused on. Although the first thing you saw me paint into the time-lapse was the helmet, because in terms of design, I felt that it could have used a little improvement, because I didn't really like this shape too much. In terms of shape, it's pretty simple, so it's a strong shape, but I didn't really understand this plaque on top, this shape and these little holes. I don't know if it's something that can come down or, you know, it's not explained. So overall, I didn't really like these, and it didn't really communicate what's the shape of these helmet behind. So this could totally be just, you know, a mask that does something like this and it's strapped, and we don't really get it from this angle. So I tried to change the design in a way that made more sense to me, and it's also more appealing in terms of shape, I feel like. And the same thing can be said for the pauldron. And also in terms of material, I try to tweak the lighting a little bit, because you can see if this is bone material, which is commonly used for this kind of armor in this setting, there's a little bit too much contrast happening. You know, if the value of your object in the light it's this bright, it's very rare, unless it's reflective, that it's gonna become this dark, right? And it gets even darker here. So this is too much contrast. This is why, to give it a more, you know, matte finish like a bone, I try to keep the lighting, the value range a little bit more restricted. And I also try to keep it more consistent, because you can see that the lighting in general is coming from the front. So if you see the jacket, the vest, and the pants, the light is coming straight from the front. But then you have this helmet that is kind of lit from the side, and it feels inconsistent. So another thing that I try to do also while making these objects lit diffusely is to think of, you know, the light is coming from the center. So let's try to keep that in mind when we light everything. Okay, taking a look at the colors in general, I also try to add a little bit more saturation and variety, because sure, the style is kind of grim and semi-realistic, so we don't want to go too crazy with the colors, not have exaggerated colors. But I think we don't have almost any hue variation. If you check the color wheel at the top right, you can see that when I pick, it barely moves from left to right. It just stays around those desaturated orange reds. And this is true for all of the materials. Like if we go down here, you can see that I'm picking yellows and it stays there. So what I try to do is keep that in mind and just create a little bit more harmony in the colors and more variety. So I added some saturation to the reds at the top, and I also thought, you know, this red only exists here, so let me try to change that. And that's why I added these red stripes bandages instead of these original ones. So we have this color existing somewhere else. It's not a problem if it exists only there, but I personally like to, you know, have the color exist in a few other places to create a sense of cohesion, like I said in the previous episode. Another thing that I did to the top part is adding a little bit more obvious clip. And this could be like pieces of bones that are used to keep the outfit together, like the pieces of cloth or leather together. And I just made sure that we could really see them a little bit better. It creates, you know, a small amount of variety that is always nice to have. Then continuing top to bottom, sorry. The pauldrons here on the left, I changed the shape a little bit, because I think that if we do these in terms of functionality as well, this pauldron now acts like pauldron should do to prevent the neck being cut across. But if you have the pauldron just being here, then your neck is still exposed. Like even if you have this leather here, if you also have the bone, you're gonna have a lot more protection. So this is just a functionality and also shape design choice that I made to improve that area. And in terms of shape, I also changed these plaques here just to make it a little bit more appealing, because I felt this was kind of like merging into each other, not having a very clear separation. So making these makes the overlap more obvious and more appealing to me. You also can see that in the main cloth I used a green tint, and that is simply to balance out the red from the top and create a more interesting color. But I decided that just going completely green might have been too overpowering, too weird, because it might have been an obvious choice. So I decided to introduce also this dirt that, together with the damage, really gives us the feeling that this guy lives in a hostile land, in maybe villages across the desert or wastelands. So you can use this kind of thinking when you create materials as well. Do not just think about this is a grain tattered cloth. This also has damage to it, and it's been dirtied with sand or dirt. So there's a lot of thinking that can go into something like this. And in this case, in this instance, I just used this very desaturated green because I didn't want something too strong or too cartoony. And then I added these browns as a complement to kind of create this very appealing effect on the jacket and the vest. One thing going down to the belt is that I really liked how it's rendered out. Nicola mentioned in his email that he was a little bit worried about the rendering, but I think the rendering is fine. It's more a matter of shape design and thinking about how to improve that. And sure, maybe you could avoid using too much texture brushes everywhere if you don't want to give it a uniform look, because when you have so much noise going around everywhere, then it becomes hard to differentiate the material, so you might want to be careful about it. But I also think it doesn't really need more rendering. You might just want to change the materials around a little bit more, and then you're gonna create callouts in forms of just photo texture things. This is a piece of insect carapace or a bone, and this is leather. So the 3D artist that is going to create this armor is then able to understand what the material is. Because if you just give him the 2D image, just a concept, and you don't have any indication of what the materials are, then he might get confused. And remember that as a concept artist, your job is to avoid that kind of confusion. You're trying to solve problems, you're trying to answer questions. So always provide extra callouts with information and clarification about materials and details and shapes and whatnot. So I think, the leather is very well rendered here in the belts. But one thing I thought is that it's a little bit too nice for guys that has an armor that it's so worn out and put together with pieces of insects and stuff. So while I kept the ones on the right, I also decided to change the other one to make it a little bit more organic feeling, because they were all these neat, square, perfect shape that was so well kept together that I thought, let's try to change it around, make it a little bit more organic and closed with some thick thread and also some little piece of bones that can close the bag here. So just try to make it a little bit more worn out. And the same thinking of little pieces of bone is what I did here on the cloth. And I just give him also a little small bracelet. So throughout the design, I try to reuse this idea of, we have these little pieces of bones that are used to sew things together. And coming down to the bottom part, I decided that this is not so much these changes for the best, because I simply think that it could definitely work with just this piece of cloth coming down. It creates a more asymmetrical design, which is nice and interesting. But I felt that I just kind of wanted to create this whole piece of cloth that goes from front to back, because I also wasn't really liking the way that this leather was wrapping on top of a piece of armor that was wrapping on top of the pants, and they were keeping kind of like the same color even though they're different materials. So I just decided, let me change that to something that I find a little bit more appealing, and give him like a cloth that goes on top of the pants completely. So that's what I did. And finally, we can take a look at the bottom part for the legs. Again, I darkened the pants to create this, change of values from medium to dark to light to dark. So we keep thinking about how you can alternate values with each other to avoid creating something that is completely uniform. And in certain spots, you can see that it becomes kind of hard to read when you have something like this, where you have these dark stripes against these dark but slightly brighter stripes, and then you have one here. So it's really difficult to understand. Is this occlusion? Is this like a leather strap that is keeping the bone here on top, and why it's not here? So what I did is think about that and separate first the values in a single range, and then add these brownish stripes to make it clear that these are keeping our bone plates together and are wrapping around the leg like so. And just try to really separate pieces from each other. And I think this is pretty much the gist of it. There's not a whole lot that I changed. I think the pose was solid, and I like the choice of material, the initial design. So these were kind of minor changes that I would do to improve the design, make it a little bit more organic and appealing and varied in terms of color. Alright guys, and with that said, this is all for this episode. And as usual, if you have any question, let me know in the comments. And like Nicola did, you can send me your art at the email you can find in the description under this video, and I'll take a look and see if I can make another episode with feedback on your own art. Until next time, see you guys!